There is a ritual so ancient, so quietly powerful, that it has been practiced behind closed doors in Jewish homes across every continent for more than 3,000 years. It does not require a temple. It does not require a rabbi. It does not require wealth to begin. It requires only salt, water, intention, and the willingness to engage with a tradition that has survived every empire, every persecution, and every economic collapse in recorded history, emerging on the other side not merely intact, but more potent, more refined, and more demonstrably effective than almost any prosperity practice the modern world has yet produced. Tonight, you are going to learn this ritual. And in 3 days, if you follow it with the precision and the reverence it deserves, you are going to begin to see your relationship with money transform in ways that will feel, at first, almost too extraordinary to believe. But before we get to the ritual itself, you need to understand something fundamental about the Jewish relationship with salt, because without this understanding, the ritual is merely a ceremony. With it, the ritual becomes a technology, a precise and ancient instrument for tuning the human energy field to the frequency of abundance. Salt appears in the Hebrew Bible more than 30 times. It is not a minor symbol. It is one of the foundational elements of the entire covenant between the Hebrew people and the divine. When the Torah records the laws of sacrifice, it commands explicitly that every offering brought to the altar must be seasoned with salt. The Hebrew phrase used is Brit Melach, which translates as the covenant of salt. A covenant of salt, not a covenant of gold, not a covenant of silver or precious stones, though the ancient world was full of all of these. Salt. Why? Because in the ancient world, salt was the substance that prevented decay. Salt was the substance that preserved life across time. A piece of meat without salt would rot within days, return to the earth, dissolved into formlessness. A piece of meat preserved in salt could travel across continents, survive seasons, feed families through winter. Salt, in the ancient understanding, was the substance that held form against the natural tendency of all things to dissolve into chaos. And this is precisely what the Brit Melach, the covenant of salt, was communicating about the nature of divine promises. The covenant sealed with salt is a covenant that does not decay, a covenant that holds its form across time, an agreement with permanence written into its molecular structure. Now carry this understanding into the domain of wealth. One of the most consistent findings in the study of prosperity psychology is that the single greatest obstacle to sustained wealth creation is not the absence of opportunity. Opportunities exist in every economy, in every season, in every phase of a person's life. The greatest obstacle is what behavioral economists call temporal discounting, the human tendency to value immediate rewards so heavily that we systematically undervalue future rewards, trading lasting abundance for temporary comfort again and again until the pattern becomes a prison. The person who cannot resist spending today's money on today's pleasures will never accumulate tomorrow's wealth. This is mathematical law, not moral judgment. Salt, in the ancient symbolic language, is the antidote to temporal discounting. Salt is the substance of preservation, of patience, of the willingness to hold what you have received long enough for it to transform into something more valuable than it was when it arrived. When the Jewish tradition builds salt into its most sacred financial practices, it is encoding this understanding into the body, into the hands, into the sensory experience of the practitioner, making abstract wisdom concrete through physical engagement. This is the genius of ritual. It takes what the mind understands theoretically and drives it into the nervous system through repeated sensory experience until it becomes instinct. The Talmud, which is essentially the world's oldest collection of wisdom on how to live well across every dimension of human existence, including the financial dimension, contains a passage that has fascinated scholars for centuries. It says that a person should always keep salt on their table. Always, not sometimes, not during festivals, always. The rabbis of the Talmudic period debated this instruction at length, offering various interpretations, but the one that recurs most consistently across the commentaries is this: the table represents your life's provision, everything that sustains you and your family. Salt on the table is a constant physical reminder that your provision is under the Brit Melach, the covenant of preservation. It is a daily act of faith that what has been given will not decay, that abundance is not temporary, that the flow of provision into your life is not accidental but covenantal. Now we come to the specific ritual of the salt cup, which is distinct from the general table practice and which has been passed down through particular Sephardic Jewish communities, especially those whose roots trace back to the ancient trading centers of Babylon, Persia, and the medieval spice routes of North Africa. The Sephardic communities, it is worth noting, have historically produced some of the most commercially sophisticated people in human history. The Rothschild financial empire, the trading dynasties of Amsterdam and Livorno and Salonika, the merchant families who essentially created the infrastructure of early modern global commerce, many of these emerged from communities where the salt cup practice was part of the household rhythm, as natural and unremarkable as lighting candles on Friday evening. Here is how you perform the ritual, and here is why each element works. You begin at night, and tonight is perfect for this, because the nighttime hours in the Kabbalistic tradition are considered hours of Binah, which is the third sephirah on the tree of life, and the one most associated with understanding, gestation, and the invisible preparation that precedes visible manifestation. The great Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari, taught that the night hours are when the divine feminine energy of Binah is most accessible, and Binah, in its material expression, is the womb of prosperity, the invisible intelligence that takes the seeds of intention planted during the day and begins the process of bringing them into form. When you begin a prosperity ritual at night, you are aligning yourself with this gestational intelligence, placing your intention into the womb of creation at the precise time when creation is most receptive. You will need 3 things: a cup or bowl, preferably one you associate with abundance and beauty, one that you would not be embarrassed to put on a table you were proud of, because the aesthetic quality of your ritual objects communicates something to your subconscious about how seriously you are taking what you are doing. You will need water, clean water, the best quality water available to you. And you will need salt. And here the tradition is specific: coarse salt, not fine ground table salt, but the large crystal salt that the Hebrew tradition calls melach gasa, rough salt, the kind that would have been used in the ancient sacrificial offerings, the kind whose large crystals catch the light and seem to hold it. Fill the cup with water first. As you pour the water, speak your intention aloud. Do not whisper it. Do not think it silently. Speak it, because in the Kabbalistic understanding of language, and modern linguistics has arrived at this same insight through entirely different means, the spoken word is a creative act of a fundamentally different order than the thought. The Hebrew word for word is davar, and davar also means thing or matter. In the Hebrew cosmology, words are not descriptions of reality. Words are constituents of reality. When God creates the universe in Genesis, the creation happens through speech. And when you speak your intention clearly and audibly, you are engaging this same creative principle at the human level, participating in the same creative process through the same instrument. Your intention should be specific, but not grasping. There is a distinction in the Kabbalistic teaching between what they call ratzon, which is desire aligned with purpose, and tava, which is craving driven by lack. Ratzon pulls abundance toward you through the natural magnetism of aligned purpose. Tava repels abundance by broadcasting the frequency of scarcity. The difference in how these feel when you speak them is actually quite clear once you pay attention. Ratzon feels expansive, warm, alive with possibility. Tava feels tight, anxious, contracted. As you speak your intention over the water, notice how it feels, and if it feels contracted, soften it. Move it from the domain of desperate wanting into the domain of purposeful receiving. Then add the salt. 3 pinches, and this is not arbitrary. 3 is the number that the ancient Pythagorean tradition called the first actual number, the first quantity that transcends the relationship between self and other, the first number that creates something genuinely new. 1 is the self. 2 is the relationship between self and other. 3 is what emerges from that relationship, the child of the union, the creation. 3 pinches of salt represent the creative principle, the generative power of the union between your intention and the divine abundance that is always seeking channels through which to express itself. As you add each pinch, say the following, or something that resonates with the same meaning in your own language and your own voice. The first pinch, what I receive with gratitude. The second pinch, what I receive, I preserve with wisdom. The third pinch, what I receive, I return with increase. These three declarations are not merely affirmations in the modern sense of the word. They are covenantal statements. They are you entering into the Brit Melach, the covenant of salt, the agreement that says abundance flowing through you will be honored, protected and multiplied rather than wasted, hoarded, or taken for granted. Now place the cup on your table. Not hidden away, not tucked in a corner, but on your table, the central surface of your domestic life, the place where food is shared, where conversation happens, where family gathers, where the basic transactions of daily human existence take place. Leave it there for 3 days. During these 3 days, the salt will do something that is both physically real and symbolically profound. It will begin to dissolve into the water. The large crystals, visible and distinct at the beginning, will slowly release their structure into the liquid, becoming invisible, becoming part of the water itself. And the water will become denser, more mineral-rich, more electrically conductive. This physical transformation is a mirror of the metaphysical process the ritual is initiating in your life. The rigid boundaries between your current financial reality and the reality of abundance you are calling in will begin to dissolve. The things that seemed solid and fixed, the limiting beliefs, the unconscious spending patterns, the fear-based financial decisions that have kept you locked in the same economic stratum, will begin to soften, to release their crystalline rigidity, to become fluid, available for transformation. Every morning during these 3 days, before you do anything else, before you check your phone, before you make coffee, before you engage with any of the noise and urgency of the day, stand in front of the salt cup for 60 seconds. Just stand there. Look at it. Notice how the water is changing. Notice what thoughts arise. Notice what feelings move through you. Because this practice of attentive witnessing is doing something that modern neuroscience calls salience calibration. You are teaching your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that decides what information from the environment deserves your conscious attention, that abundance and its signs are worth noticing. And once your reticular activating system is calibrated for abundance, you will begin to see opportunities, connections, and possibilities that were always present but were previously invisible to you because your brain had not been instructed that they mattered. This is not mysticism, though it is also mysticism. Both things are true simultaneously. The ancient teachers understood something that neuroscience is only now articulating with precision, which is that attention is not a passive receptor of reality, but an active co-creator of it. What you consistently attend to with focused intention literally reshapes the neural architecture of your brain, rewiring your perception, your memory, and your decision-making in ways that alter the trajectory of your material life. The 60 seconds of daily attentive witnessing before the salt cup is a neuroscientific intervention dressed in the language of covenant. On the evening of the 3rd day, which in the Hebrew reckoning always begins at sunset, you will complete the ritual. And this completion is as important as the initiation, because in the Kabbalistic understanding, every creative cycle must have a clear beginning, middle, and end. An unclosed ritual is like an unclosed electrical circuit. The energy builds, but has nowhere to discharge, nowhere to flow into the world in the form of tangible results. Take the cup outside if possible. If not, stand near an open window. Pour the water onto the earth or toward the earth, and as you pour, say these words or their equivalent in your own voice. I release what I have held. I trust the cycle of return, and I am open to receive in the measure that I have given. Then rinse the cup with clean water, dry it carefully, and put it away. Not in a place of storage and neglect, but in a place of honor, because you will use it again at the next moon or the next significant threshold in your financial life. Because the salt cup practice is not a one-time transaction. It is a practice, a recurring calibration, a seasonal tuning of your relationship with abundance. Now let us go deeper into the psychology of why this works, because understanding the mechanism is not separate from the ritual. Understanding is part of the ritual. The Chabad tradition, one of the most intellectually sophisticated schools of Jewish mysticism, teaches a principle called Cheshbon HaNefesh, which translates roughly as the accounting of the soul. This is a practice of rigorous self-examination, a regular inventory of the internal landscape, the beliefs, the patterns, the emotional contracts that shape every external outcome, including the financial ones. And Cheshbon HaNefesh teaches something that every great wealth educator from Napoleon Hill to Tony Robbins to Ramit Sethi has discovered independently. The primary financial battlefield is not the market. It is not the economy. It is not your boss or your industry or your city. The primary financial battlefield is the human mind, specifically the set of mostly unconscious beliefs about money that were installed in you between birth and the age of 7 by the people, experiences, and environments that surrounded you before you had the critical faculty to evaluate and accept or reject them. Every person reading this carries a money story. Most people carry a money story characterized by some version of scarcity. Money is hard to come by. Wealthy people got there through luck or exploitation. It is spiritual to be poor. Wanting money is greedy. Rich people are not happy. I am not the kind of person who has a lot of money. These are not economic observations. These are spells, in the most literal sense of the word. They are linguistic structures that shape perception, and perception shapes behavior, and behavior shapes outcome. The Salt Cup ritual works in part because it gives the body and the nervous system a physical experience that contradicts these spells. Every time you perform the ritual, you are physically enacting a relationship with abundance that says, I expect provision. I receive with gratitude. I manage with wisdom. I participate in the cycle of increase. And over time, with repetition, this enacted relationship begins to overwrite the inherited money story at a level below conscious thought. The ancient rabbis understood this principle through the lens of what they called keva and kavana, which are the Hebrew words for form and intention. Keva is the fixed form of the practice, the precise physical actions, the specific words, the ritual objects, the timing. Kavana is the intention, the inner orientation, the consciousness you bring to the form. And the great debate in Jewish mystical tradition was always about which was more important. Was it sufficient to perform the form perfectly without deep kavana? Or could deep kavana compensate for imperfect form? The answer that emerged from centuries of this debate was nuanced and profound. Form without kavana is a body without a soul. Kavana without form is a soul without a body. Both are incomplete. Both are, in the end, incapable of the full embodied manifestation that material prosperity requires. This is why the specific physical elements of the Salt Cup ritual are not optional decoration. The coarse salt, the clean water, the beautiful cup, the table placement, the 3 mornings of attentive witnessing, the evening completion with earth pouring. Each of these is a kiva element, a component of the form that gives the kavanah, the intention, a body through which to move into the material world. You cannot think your way to wealth. You cannot affirm your way to wealth. You must enact your way to wealth, taking physical actions that encode new beliefs into your nervous system through repeated sensory experience. Let us talk about something that the Salt Cup tradition addresses with particular power, which is the phenomenon that Kabbalah calls the tzimtzum, the contraction. The Ari teaches that before creation, the divine light was everywhere, infinite, all-pervasive, leaving no space for anything else to exist. And so, in an act of supreme generosity, the divine contracted itself, drew back, made space, in order to allow the world and the human beings within it to exist as something genuinely distinct from the divine, something with its own agency, its own capacity for choice, its own ability to participate freely in the creative process, rather than simply being overwhelmed by infinite light. This contraction, this tzimtzum, is understood in the Kabbalistic tradition as the foundational act of love that makes all relationship possible. Now here is the financial application of this teaching, and it is extraordinary. The tzimtzum says that abundance makes room for you, that the universe in its intelligence Contract certain things so that you have the space to grow into them. The period in your life when money feels tight, when opportunities seem scarce, when the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems impossibly wide, this is not evidence that the universe has forgotten you. This may be the universe making Simsum, contracting to create the space into which your next level of abundance can expand. The Salt Cup ritual, performed with this understanding, transforms the practice from a simple manifestation exercise into an act of cosmic partnership. You are not begging the universe for money. You are participating consciously in the creative contraction and expansion cycle that governs all of material existence. This reframe is not merely philosophical, it is functionally transformative. The person who experiences financial difficulty as evidence of their unworthiness will respond to that difficulty with shame, with withdrawal, with the kind of paralytic anxiety that makes bad financial decisions even more likely. The person who experiences financial difficulty as Tsimtsum, a sacred contraction that precedes expansion, will respond with curiosity, with strategic action, with the kind of grounded confidence that attracts the opportunities, the partnerships, and the resources that eventually produce the expansion. Same external circumstances, completely different internal orientation, and completely different financial outcomes as a result. On the second night of the 3-day ritual period, you will do something additional. You will not write with a physical pen on physical paper, because the act of handwriting engages motor cortex, prefrontal cortex, and limbic system simultaneously in a way that typing does not, creating what neuropsychologists call a more complete encoding of the material being written. You will write, in as much detail as you can generate, a description of your financial life 3 years from now, written in the past tense as though you were looking back from that point, describing what has already happened. This is not journaling in the conventional sense. This is what the Kabbalistic tradition calls hitbonut, which means contemplative absorption, the practice of fully immersing your consciousness in a future reality until that reality begins to feel more familiar, more natural, more like home than the current reality does. The human brain cannot distinguish with complete reliability between a vividly imagined experience and an actual one. This is why trauma can be triggered by a movie, why a vivid dream can produce genuine emotions for hours after waking, and why the hitbonut practice of the Kabbalists is now being validated by every major school of performance psychology, from Olympic sports coaching to executive leadership development. You write the future reality, you absorb it, you let it become familiar. And familiarity, in the architecture of the human brain, is the prerequisite for behavior change, because the brain is designed above all else to move toward what is known and away from what is unknown, and you are making abundance known. Write about where you live, write about what your work feels like, write about the conversations you have about money, how relaxed they are, how creative they are, how different from the tight, anxious conversations about money that may feel normal to you now. Write about what you give, because the Sephardic tradition that carries the Salt Cup practice has always understood that the most reliable marker of genuine prosperity consciousness is not how much a person accumulates, but how freely and joyfully they give. The person who has arrived at true abundance is characterized above all by generosity, because they have internalized at the deepest level the fundamental truth that abundance is a cycle, not a container, that it flows through you rather than being stored by you, and that restricting the outflow restricts the inflow with the same mathematical certainty that closing a faucet stops both the water leaving and the water coming in. Write about your giving. Write it in detail. Write what it feels like to give from abundance rather than from scarcity. Write about the causes, the people, the communities that benefit from your prosperity. And as you write, let yourself feel what you are describing. Let the emotions be real, because the emotional charge you bring to the hitbonut practice is not decoration. It is the activating energy that begins to magnetize the written future toward the present moment. In the morning of the 3rd day before you complete the ritual that evening, do something that the Salt Cup tradition has always included, but that is rarely discussed outside the communities that practice it. Perform one concrete financial action. Not a thought, not a prayer, not an affirmation, an action. Open the savings account you have been putting off. Make the call to the potential client you have been hesitating to call. Write the first paragraph of the business plan. Negotiate the raise you have been afraid to ask for. Transfer an amount, any amount, from your checking into savings, because the movement of money, even in small quantities, sends a signal to your nervous system and to the universe that you are serious, that you are not merely wishing for abundance but are actively participating in its creation. The Talmud says, Kol hachalot kashot, which means all beginnings are difficult. But it also says, in a passage that has been quoted in Jewish business communities for 2,000 years, that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step that you actually take. The Salt Cup ritual is not designed to replace your financial actions. It is designed to prepare you for them, to create the internal conditions of clarity, confidence, and alignment that make your actions more effective, more consistent, and more powerfully directed toward the outcomes you genuinely want. When you pour the water onto the earth on the evening of the third day, something will have changed in you. It may not be dramatic. The Kabbalistic tradition actually counsels against expecting dramatic changes in the days immediately following a prosperity practice, because drama in spiritual experience often signals ego engagement rather than genuine transformation. Genuine transformation tends to be quiet, internal, and recognizable primarily in retrospect. What you are more likely to notice 3 days after the ritual is a subtle shift in how you relate to money conversations, a new idea that arrives apparently from nowhere, a contact from someone you had not thought about in months who turns out to carry an opportunity you had not imagined, a change in your own behavior that you observe with some surprise, a new willingness to take a risk you would previously have avoided, a new patience with a process you would previously have abandoned, a new generosity that feels natural rather than forced. These subtle shifts are the real miracle, not because they are small, but because they are foundational. A 1-degree change in the angle at which a ship leaves port will, over a long enough journey, produce a destination that is hundreds of miles different from where it would have arrived without that small correction. A 1-degree shift in your relationship with money, sustained over months and years, produces a financial life that is unrecognizable from the one you would have lived without it. This is the power of the Salt Cup ritual, practiced not once but consistently, returned to at each lunar cycle, at each significant financial threshold, at each moment when you feel your relationship with abundance needs recalibration. The ancient teachers who passed this practice down through generations of merchants and scholars and community leaders understood something about human nature that the entire industry of modern self-help has been attempting to rediscover. They understood that human beings do not primarily change through information. We change through experience, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of embodied moments that gradually, invisibly, and then suddenly and obviously rewrite the story we are living. The Salt Cup ritual is a technology for exactly this kind of change. It is not a shortcut. It is a deep cut, going below the surface of conscious intention into the deeper layers of nervous system programming where the real determinants of financial behavior live. You were born for abundance. This is not a comforting platitude. It is a theological and philosophical position held consistently across every wisdom tradition that has ever produced sustained prosperity in its communities. The Hebrew tradition says that every human being is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of the divine, and the divine, as described in these traditions, is characterized above all by creative abundance, by the inexhaustible generative power that fills existence with life, with beauty, with the endless capacity for more. You are made in the image of this. Scarcity is not your nature. It is a story that was placed over your nature, by circumstances, by inheritance, by the accumulated fear of generations who lived through genuine lack and encoded that fear into their children and their children's children as a survival strategy that has long since outlived its usefulness. The Salt Cup calls you back to your nature. The 3 pinches of coarse salt falling into clean water call you back to the covenant, the ancient agreement that says provision is real, that abundance is the default state of a universe overflowing with creative intelligence, and that your job, your only real financial job, is to align yourself so completely with that intelligence that abundance cannot help but flow through you. Tonight, before you sleep, find your cup. Fill it with water. Add the salt. Speak your intention. Place it on your table. And then sleep, knowing that something has begun, something old and precise and powerful, something that has worked for 3,000 years across every economic condition and every cultural context, something that is working now, in the quiet of your home, in the covenant of salt and water and spoken intention, dissolving the rigid boundaries between the financial life you have been living and the one you were born to inhabit. The ancient teachers say that when a person turns toward abundance with a whole heart, abundance turns toward them with the same wholeness. Tonight you turn, and in 3 days you will begin to feel the turning in return.